So welcome back. We just want to remind you of kind of what we talked about last time. So please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones until you're in a breakout room so you can get relaxed. Have something to write with, note paper for catching some really cool ideas. If you were able to print out your handouts ahead of time, and your grading for equity book. Please use the chat box for comments and or questions. We'll be looking at that throughout the meeting today. Today, we're going to discuss weighing more recent achievements and grades based on individuals' achievement, not the groups. Those are the two for chapter 8. And the accuracy principle is what's driving this discussion today. And our grading must use calculations that are mathematically sound, easy to understand, and correctly describe a student's level of academic performance. So I'm going to start us off really wondering, how do you do math? So, we have different programs that do it, but really you need to decide, are you going to go with the mean, mode, and median? So in the mean, we add scores and divide the total by the number in the set. So there are 5 numbers here. We divide 411 by 5, and we get 82.2. In the mode, we find the score that occurs most frequently in the set, which gives us 94. And the median, we order scores from smallest to largest and find the number in the middle of the set, which would give us like a 92. But what should we do with these outliers that are 40s? Definitely in the mean or the average, that gets factored in. And so when we're talking about weighing the most recent piece, this is where it really comes into play. So what evidence truly matters and what learning is truly important? If we look at in the book on page 97, he talked about these 4 different students and how they all started almost at different places. Like Ellis and Tanya didn't come in knowing the material, and Jason and Maria were very comfortable with it. Tanya and Ellis had to work harder, do extra sessions, etc. From September to January, where they kind of all ended up at the same point. And what happens is if you use the math where you're averaging, Ellis and Tanya, even though they ended up in the same spot, won't get the same grade if you go by the mean. So, and this really factors in our other pillar that we're going to be talking about later, the matter of equity. So it's not about the rate or the seat time, but did they ultimately learn the content or the skill that you wanted them to, and did they demonstrate that? And we have to factor out speed out of our grades, because on one hand, we tell students that the learning is what's important, right? That's all that matters. But then we allow this kind of averaging or this kind of math to influence our final decisions. And in the age of Power School, parents and students are trained to go on Power School all the time and to check like 2 or 3 times a day, even hourly, to see how students are performing in real time. And that's only really focused on the grading and not really focused on the learning. It's like, did they turn it in? Did they get a good grade? Da, 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 da. And so it doesn't allow for this long arching piece. So we really want to, if we're talking about the most recent, we also want to talk about the mode. So in this case, 94, which happens more often, but it's also the most recent. So be careful if you decide to use the mode, that you're not just finding the number that occurs most frequently in the set. Is that the best representation of their learning? So grading is more of an art as much as it is a science. So using mean, median, and mode, we're talking, are we making mathematical or pedagogical choices to promote or limit learning? And this is an accuracy and equity issue. Humans in learning are messy, 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 messy. And so we have power and responsibility that we can literally shut doors and change a student's life trajectory. And I kind of attune this to kind of like the keystone species in science, where there are unintended consequences by taking out like something important. And that's really what happens in the kids' grades. So I kind of like to talk about mean being mean. And let's just say that LeBron James walks into a room with 3 other teachers. Now, in 2014, he earned about $65 million. And so say the average salary per person in the room would approximately be 16 million per year. This is mathematically precise, but this mean calculation of salary comes nowhere near providing a clear picture of the salary that the teachers actually earn. I do not earn $16 million a year. So that's kind of what happens is being mean can skew the data, and we need to be careful about that. Our grades must use the most recent evidence and allow new evidence to replace, not simply be added to old evidence. Our grades must acknowledge that learning is a process. It's never really over, right? We want our kids to be lifelong learners. And it's about that learning path that they take. It's about their level of mastery or understanding. Our grades must acknowledge that they're learning whenever it occurs, like at the beginning, in the middle, at the end. And learning takes like long-term hard work, persistence, and time, right? We want to value that. I want to say watch out, even though I said the most recent evidence you really want to go with. I think you really know this is where it's an art rather than a science. If a student has shown proficiency early on and now like they take a test and they don't do well, really need to think about what's going on. Did something happen in their personal life that has affected their ability to take the test and to demonstrate their learning? Or has something else happened, which I call sometimes pump and dump, which means they didn't really learn the material, they just took it in, did it for whatever assignment they needed to, and then kind of dumped it out and they've forgotten about it. So grades based on the most consistent level of performance is where I usually go with my professional judgment. Our classrooms must allow for multiple opportunities to learn and to demonstrate that learning. So the consequence for a student who fails to meet the standard is not a low grade. It should actually be more learning, right? And it should be an opportunity to grow, like you're giving them this opportunity for continuous improvement. And I think we're so afraid that kids are going to cheat or they're going to blow off the first assessment. But really how I focus on this is I focus on giving questions that they can't Google or cheat. I spend a lot of time in my upper ends of blooms where they're applying and analyzing, and they're doing their own work and their own analyzing, so that cheating rarely ever happens when they're up in that type of level. The last thing is that really check to make sure your assessments are reliable and valid. We have to actually look at ourselves. Did my assessment allow or reveal and facilitate true learning? Or did my assessment yield incorrect results that could affect a student's performance? Or did I actually test what I wanted my students to learn or that I taught? So sometimes we have to reflect on our teaching. When I get some of my tests back, I'm like, oh, I bombed this. It was my bad. So those are the kind of things that you really want to consider when you're using math to do your grades. So that being said, I really thought this, actually, Bree, can you go back with that little quote about pure mathematics of mean averaging is that every score of a 40 needs an 80 to reach an average of 60. And practically speaking, students who start slow or low are immediately disadvantaged in their prospects of earning full credit when they reach their highest level. But if a teacher applies a standards-based mindset to their situation, a student who used to be a 40 but is now an 80 is an 80 and not a 60. So I really want you to consider that. So now what we're going to do is go into our breakout rooms. Please assign a timekeeper, a discussion facilitator, and a note keeper. You're going to have 10 minutes. And what I really want you to focus on is, does your math represent the most recent achievement? And how can you make your grades accurately reflect student growth? Before I call on some groups to share out, I just wanted to pause and kind of recap for a second about what's the most accurate representation of a student's performance, and talking about using 3 different types of finding information about sets. Do we use mean, mode, or median? And the one that seems to be the most accurate tends to be the mode, especially if you use the most recent performance. And I really like this quote by Tim, and numbers can make our grading decisions more efficient, but the numbers shouldn't decide the level of proficiency. Teachers should. And I really think that's what makes teaching an art, and is really why I enjoy teaching, is that artistic side of it rather than just being the science and side of things. So I would like to have breakout room number 3 to share out. Does your math represent the most recent achievement, and how can you make your grades accurately reflect student growth?
Thank you. So we kind of talked about how we understand the grading system in terms of the 1 through 4 and how that standards based is better. And we kind of all wish that we could keep just all the standards and not have to have a number grade associated with it. So we agreed that they don't really accurately reflect at the moment, but working with those standards, and Dowdy said he was the one who created standards. You work together to create that language for standards. And isn't it just enough if a kid is meeting those standards 3 times, 2 to 3 times? So we don't think it necessarily reflects at the moment, but we know where we want it to go. And we are the ones who should be the ones deciding what students have for that end grade.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kaylee. Can I have someone from group number 6?
And that is me. Hello. I had the pleasure of talking with Patty, Stephanie, and Cynthia. And it was interesting because 2 of the teachers in the room are actually working with a very progressive labor-based contract with students that really eliminates kind of all of the issues we're talking about and seems to really elevate investment and what's possible, and also can be an asset to reducing violence against Black people with a grading system that really is racist and unfair. One of the fabulous teachers is now a math consultant and very much believes that formative assessments are not summative assessments, and that we need to look at the long-term progress of each student. And I just said that my school is a bit schizophrenic, that in theory we're proficiency based, but in practice it's just honestly a hot mess. So that's us.
Yeah, and I think some schools are like that. I kind of feel that way sometimes in my school. One thing I did today was I actually in our school, literacy standards are year long. And so I spoke to them today and I said, you know, you now have hope, you know, forget about, you know, if you haven't done things in the past, it's a new year. You have the chance, because I'm going to take your 3 top grades for your 3 pieces of evidence. And moving forward, we're going to keep redoing these standards and you're going to have multiple opportunities. And I have 2 kids in the back, both students of color, and they looked at each other and they were like, so we're okay, we won't fail for the year. And I'm like, no, you have the opportunity to not fail for the year. Like, you have the chance to like fix all this. And they were just like, they made a plan with each other. They're like, okay, we're gonna go home, we're gonna do this and this and this before we play Fortnite. And we had just gotten messages from other teachers that these kids had shut down in their classes, that they weren't going to do anything. And when I kind of explained to them, this is how I do it, they felt like they had hope. And I think that's really what we want for all of our kids, is that, you know, what are you going to do to them halfway through the year? They're just going to check out. And that's the worst thing that could ever happen. So thank you guys for sharing. That's amazing. I'm going to turn it over to Bree. For her to take over for the second half.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Just before I get started, I want to let you all know that if you are paying any attention to my camera while I'm talking, you don't need to pay attention to the slides. I am still in my classroom and we have the very efficient lights that will shut off if there's no movement. And I'm not going to jump up while I'm presenting to turn them back on, but I have some lamps around me and the light from the window, if it doesn't get too dark soon, will hopefully still continue to light me while I'm talking, okay? Alrighty. So the next and final bullet point in the accuracy pillar is grading the individual's achievement versus the group as a whole. So Feldman, in this part of chapter 8, has us look at examining the group grade. And I think as teachers, in some point in our professional careers, we have had plenty of professional discussions with our peers. Maybe it's been some actual professional development time to work together, to collaborate as peers, to talk about doing group work and how it should look like, and activities and the curriculum that would go around doing the actual group work and the assignment and what would be the product that the students produce. We've done this plenty of times in our careers, I'm sure. And so I think we all can agree that group work promotes collaboration because it helps students to generate complex ideas as we are talking to each other, solve problems, use our unique talents. The students can figure out what are they strong at, what are they good at, and use those talents to support one another and add to the discussion or add to the product that they may be producing. They can support others' strengths and weaknesses as they work together. They also learn the skills to manage, organize, compromise sometimes in their discussions, coordinate scheduling if they have to plan to do more work in a study hall or outside of school. These are all social skills that are important that this group work promotes. And then at the end goal, perhaps most of the time, is to create some sort of project or do a presentation. And I think we can all safely agree that collaboration is a 21st century skill that all students need to practice in school. So as we get going with this, we certainly agree that this is a skill to teach, but how do we grade it so that it is accurate mathematically and fair and equitable for each of the students as they participate in these groups? How do we set them up so that we can grade more accurately if this is such an important skill? We, as professionals, we collaborate. We have professional development days. We're collaborating even today in breakout rooms and discussing and generating ideas and supporting each other. So it's something that students are going to have to do in many different career fields in the future. So it's important for them to practice it in school, but we don't want them to be discouraged by it or dread doing it because There's so many other negative stories. Students can tell you that higher achieving students feel like they do all the work. And the lower achieving students that are in their group with them get the same grade, and they don't like that, right? So we want to make sure that we are being very accurate in how we grade in our groups. So how accurate is a group grade? On page 103, Feldman says, we believe that a group grade fosters mutual accountability and responsibility, motivates the higher performing students to support and encourage the less engaged students. Maybe the weaker students will work harder and learn more, not wanting to disappoint their peers in the group. Yet we often don't get these results. This is kind of like in a perfect world, if this is actually what we want group work to be about, the higher performing students would support the weaker students, and those weaker students would be pulled up to that higher performing level through group work, but that's just not the case all the time. So looking back again, it's important to see the driving principle once again and notice that the last part of the principle I feel really focuses and can be attached to talking about group work, where again, when we grade the group work, are we trying our best to correctly describe a student's level of academic performance? Notice it doesn't say that the accuracy pillar is about correctly describing a group's level of academic performance. So keep that in mind. What is the real purpose then of group work? Feldman states that it's not to create some product in which all the members participate, but that it's for each student to learn specific skills or content through the group's work together. So to keep grades accurate, it is better to give individual grades to each student. In my class, when I am teaching, and students might be doing a group activity or an individual activity, but if I am expecting them to do a presentation at the end of the assignment and they're going to create Google Slides to stand and present, I always tell them that their Google Slides are an extension of them as the presenter. I want to know what they have learned through the research, through the reading, through the group work, if that's what the is also part of the task. But I want to know what they have learned, what they have challenged their thinking, where have they come across some stumbling blocks and had to solve the problem in a different way and come at it from a different angle. Yes, the Google Slides are important if the product is something that I also have to grade for a standard, but that it's just to be an extension of the learning that they have done, whether collaboratively or independently, and that they will be graded independently, even if they did the Google Slides all together and are presenting together. I want to see what they know, and the product is like a byproduct. It's an extension. So ask yourself, what are you grading when students do group work? Feldman has us think about that as well in this part of chapter 8. Do we put on a rubric for group work that you're going to be grading their behavior or anything around their behavior? Are you grading that they're going to be happy with their group members? They're going to get along. They're going to stay focused. They're going to stay on task. They're going to share, we want them to share responsibility, but how is it that going to look like in their behavior within the classroom? Or are you grading it based on the content and a standard that would fall into that content? Behavior is important. I don't want to say that it isn't important. We certainly don't want to have a bunch of groups in our classrooms or even remote, as we are trying to do sometimes remote learning this year. We certainly don't want a lot of off-task behavior, fooling around, nothing's getting done, it's chaotic, it's a zoo, and you as a teacher are getting stressed out and saying, I'm never doing this again, right? But it's a practice that is a social skill that we can still continue to teach them, that we want them to use in the group. If they're not getting along with someone in the group, how can they solve that problem so that they can still move on with the tasks to be able to learn the content? But it's not really a standard that we would necessarily grade. I know that a lot of schools have habits of work, and that is some place that you could remind the students that I am grading you on your habits of work and your behavior, your respect to each other, your responsibility falls under habits of work. But again, be careful to designate behavior as like habits of work and the content under their standards that they're learning. So the essay they write or the math problems that they're solving or their science project that they do, what would they be showing you as what they've learned would fall under the contents. So then students should be held more accountable for their learning on those content standards. Feldman gives us this model and he breaks it down into 4 steps. And he says, number 1 is to tell the students and remind them that the main goal in group work is to learn content or to expand their learning or to challenge their learning about a content specific subject or task. And then as a group, you can continue to talk about the behavior, and as a group, they could discuss what they have done in the past in other classes, even for group work. And as the students could provide options for what they'd like to see for their norms as they work together in the group. But he also wants to emphasize to be patient. We are halfway through this particular school year, and if this is a goal that you would like to work on, if you do desire to make group work better and to make the grading of group work more accurate, and you're going to be making some changes in how you've modeled group work in the first semester versus the second semester, that is wonderful. And that's what we want you to, and hope that you will take away from all of these lessons, is to try something out. And don't be afraid to try it out now, even though we're in the middle of the school year, but just be patient with yourself and be patient with the students. If they have told you in step number 2 in their norms that in previous years, in other classes, in other subject areas, that they have had awful experiences with group work, and they have this sort of expectation that it has always been done this way in this format, then be patient with them if you're trying to change them and get them to rethink something, because looking at the bigger picture for them to see, like, it's about your learning and not everything necessarily is going to be graded and what you're doing in the group work. There might be a little bit of pushback and it might be hard for them to make those changes. So he says, be patient with yourself, be patient with the students as we all sort of learn to make these changes and adjustments. And then finally, the last step in the group work model is to do the assessment once they have worked through the tasks that you have provided for them to do. And again, he says, assess individually. And so some options of what that could look like. For example, here, this is a peer evaluation form and a self-evaluation checklist that I got from Teachers Pay Teachers. And you could do one, you could do both, one or the other. They could peer evaluate each other to help you get some feedback on how you might want to accurately grade and assess them for their work and for others in the group. They could do a self-evaluation. This could be something where you take this form here and use that for some formative feedback for yourself. You could do it in a conversation with each of the individual students as well. I have read in other books where they will suggest that you actually take the student self-evaluation grade as the grade. So the student is being more of a participant in their, not only in their learning, but in how they are assessing themselves. Again, that's something that you can choose to do if you feel comfortable taking the student's self-evaluation grade and put it as the final grade, or not. It can be a conversation you have as well. Feldman doesn't necessarily talk about this in the book, but I'm going to throw this out as another option for assessment, is to not grade. Sometimes the group work, again, if it's about the learning and it's about moving them forward into a skill, into a task, and maybe it's just a group activity for one class period and it's not a long, extensive project, do you actually have to grade that? Is it something that they use that time and that conversation and the discussion that they're having in a group to then come to a larger group discussion, a Socratic seminar, or a gallery walk where you get to walk around the room and the students get to see the product that was presented, but it doesn't necessarily have to go in as a grade either. Again, take it or leave it, do what you will with that and what feels comfortable with you, but it's something to kind of try out every once in a while, that not every task in the classroom has to be graded. Again, be patient, because students will sort of expect that if they sat together and had a discussion or created a poster, that they should be graded for that. And be patient with the pushback if you're like, but I'm not grading it because it's just about your learning. So that concludes this bullet point for grading the individual versus the group. And I'm going to send you into breakout room number 2. Again, you will have 10 minutes. Please try to pay attention to your room numbers as you are entering into your room numbers. So when we call you back, we will call out randomly a couple different groups to be able to share out, and the note keeper will be the person who will share out. So again, assign a timekeeper to make sure that you're staying within the time to be able to make sure everyone has a chance to share within the group, and a discussion facilitator, again, to just make sure that everyone is having a chance to share and speak, and a note keeper. And in this discussion, we have 3 big questions, and Morgan will be putting in, there is a template for this as well. If you want to fill it out on the template, you can. If you have paper, you can just jot these 3 questions down on paper and answer them there. Again, we wanted to share the template with you because, again, it's something that you could use in your classroom if you feel that that would be a great discussion or graphic organizer to use with your students. So the 3 big questions are: what surprised you about grading the individual versus grading the whole group as a whole group? What did the author think you already knew before really getting into the discussion? And then what challenge, changed, or confirmed what you already knew? On the template, there are some sentence starters to help you answer these 3 questions. So we are going to share out right now. And I wanted to just remind you again of the questions that as we call on the different groups, you don't necessarily have to answer all the questions. You can focus on one of them if you want, but feel free to share as much as you want as well. So what surprised you? What did the author think you already knew? What challenge, changed, or confirmed what you already knew? So I'm going to start with room number 3.
So hi, I was the note taker. One of the big things we focused on in our group was the last part of the question. And we all sort of agreed that we were confirmed about our decisions to give individual grades for group work, to do some sort of self-evaluation and make the learning clear. So establish what students should be doing in that time, and sort of make the expectations clear before we set them off. Oops, sorry. Of course. And then, oh my gosh. Sorry. And then something that challenged us was, oh my goodness. I don't know how to turn off my notifications. I'm so sorry. Okay. So was peer assessment. We were challenged by that idea because we felt like, you know, as teachers, if we're biased, imagine what would happen if we are allowing students to evaluate each other. So really making that clear would be difficult.
Clear as in the expectation that for, if you were to do a peer evaluation, what you'd be expecting for the students to do.
Yeah. And then, but we did have a nice chat about how it would be really helpful to teach them how to structure that, to teach them how to deliver constructive feedback, especially like nowadays, having a productive conversation and not necessarily just telling people that they're so great and what they want to hear.
Yes.
So it would be actually a good exercise for our students, particularly our older ones, as we send them off into the real world.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm glad that it confirmed. It's good to hear that there are others out there that agree that assessing individually in the group work is important, and it does help to make the grades more accurate for the students. And I definitely love how you said it is a lesson and a skill that we need to teach students about how to effectively give peer feedback. I know that is something that I definitely talk about with my students in my classes. I teach English and I also get to teach creative writing. And in my creative writing class, which I realize is not the main English class, but we do a lot of writing, and they do have to share their stories with one another and giving feedback in that, even in that sense, not just even in group work, but just practicing it at as many opportunities as possible. When they give the feedback, being very specific about the expectations of what you want them to be looking for, what you want them to be listening to from their peers, so they can provide appropriate feedback that is going to make a difference. I always tell them, like, how are you going to continue to encourage and help each other? You can also be a teacher, but they feel like they don't have enough skills or enough knowledge. How can I tell someone that their grammar is wrong if I don't really grasp it well enough myself, right? So they always sort of feel like they don't necessarily know or feel that they are adequately trained enough. So definitely being very specific about what you want them to give peer feedback is helpful and a skill they should be practicing and learning, even though it's a challenge. Thank you. And that was group 3, right? I'm going to call in group 2.
This is Kate Drummond, and I am note taker, so I'm going to report out. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about, we didn't spend a lot of time, sorry, talking about group work, but I think many of us we're still kind of circling in our minds around, you know, accuracy, mathematical accuracy and grading. And so I think people, some people were taken a little bit by surprise thinking about, you know, math. It's kind of a new idea, I think, for us to think about grading using a mode as opposed to an average. And I think people have thought of the math of grading as kind of this impartial tool, and they haven't thought about it as being something that can be biased or judgmental. So that was a kind of a new idea that has taken people by surprise. And then some things that changed or confirmed what we already knew. You know, for people who teach writing, the practice of writing, where you do a lot of revisions before you do a final work, is actually a mathematically accurate way to grade, because you're grading sort of the work at the end after they've had several revisions. Some people express some concerns, and they're thinking about peer evaluation, especially with special needs kids, and how you could go about doing that. And then also still struggling and being challenged by the idea of putting in 50s for incomplete work and what to do when you don't have evidence. I mean, I think people are still mulling over that question.
That's actually, it's really great to hear, though, because this is something that we started off with the accuracy pillar with the first 3 bullet points that you brought up, a couple of them last week, and then the last 2 this week. And it's a lot to chew, isn't it? It's a big bite to chew. So we're going to continue, and I'm going to move on. That's sort of like a great segue. Thank you for sharing. Just to get back to again, pointing out, to recap, you brought these things up, as you mentioned. Avoid giving, the whole accuracy pillar are these 5 standards, and avoid giving zeros for missing work. Set a minimum grading floor. For example, the 50 if your passing grade is a 60, or a 60 if your passing grade is a 70, to lessen the gap between the different grade levels. Use the 0 to 4 scale, weigh more recent achievement, and then again, grade the individual, not the group. So these are the 5 bullet points, the 5 parts of the accuracy pillar that Feldman practices and wants us to try to adopt into our classrooms as well. But we want to make sure that it's very clear to you all that choose something, but not necessarily do you have to practice everything right now. There's a lot here, and go with something that you would feel maybe easiest or most comfortable to put into practice first, and set it for yourself as a goal. Continue learning and reading other books and doing more research into these practices to see how other teachers are doing it. Michelle and I are definitely available for you to continue the conversation. Our sessions end with us today. You'll have different presenters next time, but we would be more than happy to continue the conversation and to see how we are putting it into practice. I did this book study first over the summertime with Patty and Morgan as well. And I just set out for this year to just start with avoid giving zeros for missing work and seeing how that's going to go and how that's going to work for my classroom. Well, at the same time, in the back of my head, if I am doing something with group work, I also want to see like, okay, how could I look at a self-evaluation, which I sometimes am hesitant to do because of course I look at the kids like, I got a 4, I did everything. Like they want to like praise themselves and like maybe not be as honest with themselves. That's what that would be my weakness, is think that the students are, they can't judge their work as best as I can. But like, that would be something that I would want to maybe give it a try and just see if it would work or not, but maybe not make it my biggest goal this year. So don't be pressured to do all of this. But just continue to look at your grades, continue to self-question yourself and see how accurate are your grades and what can we be doing to continue to strive to making our grades accurate for all of our students. We are going to go back to the anticipation guide that we had you all fill out before the first session or before this session if you were joining us for the first time today. And we're going to come to those now to kind of see like maybe where your thinking has changed or progressed through these past couple of sessions. But before we get to that, we have this cute little parody that we'd like to share with you about grading. And how accurate is Mr. D, this teacher, in his grading? This does come from the CBC, the Canada Broadcasting. And so this is a Canadian comedy show. So maybe you're not as familiar with it, but it's very funny, I think. And so enjoy this quick little clip.
Not really. Let me explain how this works. If these were regular tests, what I would do is I would find the smartest students, Maya, and I would mark hers first. Right. And I'd use that as my answer key. But these are essay questions. Now, if I were to read these, it would take forever. So I don't. So I look at their mark going into it. Okay, like Maya, where's Maya? Has the highest mark in the class. There she is. So that's my answer key.
Don't you already know the answers?
Sometimes theirs are better. I got to give her a good mark, a couple circles, and then sometimes too vague.
Right.
That way I don't have to give her 100.
Yeah,
They only look
keep
at
it
the
realistic.
mark, 96. I give her a little more than she has going in. That way she won't come back.
Right.
Challenge me. Okay.
It's a good
Come on.
system.
Jimmy, look at Jimmy. Nothing.
Right, it's never nothing.
Garbage. Waste of time. 33. There's some words there, but I have no time to read them. So then I get angry. Jimmy, ridiculous.
Right.
This has got to stop.
He can say the same thing to you.
Okay, you got the system?
Yeah, it's a good system, buddy.
You do those ones.
You want me to mark them?
You don't really mark. You just
All right.
put marks on it. And you put a circle. You circle a
Sounds
number.
good. I'm a forger.
Okay, here's Mike. Now, Mike's got a 62.
You should give him an 80.
Give him
That'll
an
make his
80.
day.
Make his day.
Right?
Okay. And he goes home. His parents are excited. I like that. Finally,
Like you've been rooting for him the whole
Yeah.
time.
about
Right.
time. Thank
That's
you.
good.
This person, Shauna, I don't like her. Drives me nuts.
Right.
So what I do is I fail her on the exam, but I just give her enough to pass the course, so I don't have to teach her again. So it's like a lot of check marks, some question marks, underlines of things, couple good comments.
Mediocre.
I haven't used that one. That's a good one. Happy face, smile.
That's disturbing.
You are almost a teacher.
Mr. D, Monday starting January 9th on CBC.
Okay, there we go. Alrighty. So moving on to our final step is to go back to the anticipation guide and to do a follow-up. These were the last 3 questions that we wanted you to focus on for tonight specifically. And they are, it's so hard to bring your grade up, but so easy to bring it down. Averaging a set of scores is the most accurate and fair way to grade. And a grade is accurate when it reflects a student's current level of performance, not the history of their performance. So we'd asked you these as statements, and we'd asked on the anticipation guide if you like agree or disagree. And so now, after having answered, what do you think about these grades now? About these questions now? We are not going to send you into a breakout room at this time, but I do just want to open up the floor for people to be able to just share out their own changes, their own growth, their own thoughts on where they are right now. So you go ahead and you can sort of just unmute yourselves, and we'll sort of call on you if you want. If no one's speaking, just go right ahead and speak right up.
And you can turn on your cameras too, so we can see your faces as you're talking with us, make it seem a little more.
So I thought all those things were false before, and I still think they're false. You know, making it hard to bring a grade up is like an easy way to push a kid out of your room, either like physically or mentally. And averaging, you know, doesn't take into account if, you know, at the beginning they were struggling, or if they had some personal issues in the middle and it goes way down. They're kind of related. And then the same thing with the current level, like if it's a trend, that's different, but it doesn't tell you. I don't think having the most recent grade be the grade you use is accurate either, because I don't know, what are you grading? You're grading the most recent unit or whatever you've been covering. Maybe they're good at that. So I mean, I think a lot of the problems with these is that it demotivates kids, and they're kind of unfair, and it doesn't keep them in the game, I guess.
Right. Definitely. And we will come to motivation later on as well. But I think in general, if the grade is accurate, like you said, it's not fair. So if the grade is accurate, then the students will feel like there was some fairness there as well, and will not feel necessarily as demotivated. Even if they have a lower grade, then they know they have something they can work on, but they feel like, yep, that's the amount of effort I put into it. So that's how fair I should get for a grade, and vice versa, right? And how much and I agree with what you're saying, Alberto, but I think where Feldman is coming from, I don't think he's necessarily, I mean, some of the charts that he gives, he does talk about like year-long growth. If you have a standard that does go like for the whole year, but within a unit itself, I think you can do like the most recent. So if you're teaching one specific standard and it might last for a 2 or 3 month unit, within that unit space would be like, where's that most recent? So I agree with you, like there are some standards that you won't be teaching all the way through a whole year perhaps. And so you certainly couldn't just take where they're at in June versus where they are at in September if it was completely different standards.
Right.
But within a unit. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure like what time period it was assessing.
Someone else, please.
I could do statement number 5. Statement number 5 was averaging a set of scores is the most accurate and fair way to grade. I disagree with that statement, because if a child, you know, over time has done very, very well, and they have one grade that does not reflect what you think the child has shown you over the course of time, I don't feel that grade should be reflected in the average. And the other one, I think a grade is accurate when it reflects a student's current level of performance, not a history of performance. When kids are first learning something, when they're first learning it and they're on that trajectory of learning, yes, I don't feel they should be graded on that learning process until they finally get to where they can demonstrate proficiency, either on that standard or on the assignment, or whatever it is.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Okay.
Helen, you had your hand up as well.
Oh, I didn't know there was a hand.
I was going to mention, sort of connected to what Alberto was saying, I think that some of our grading practices can harm students. And so someone in our group had mentioned that they used to do they do the senior capstone project. And at one point they had offered an option of a group senior capstone project, and it was just very unsuccessful. And I think probably because of previous grading practices that assigned group grades, and where that group project that a student might have had in 3rd grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, they felt they needed to take on all the weight so that there wouldn't be this. So I think it applies to a lot of our grading practices, that it may take away from the point of learning, because another person was sharing that
when we are in our breakout rooms tonight and we're sharing and talking and working through things with each other and learning from each other, like we're no longer focused on like, what's our group grade going to be tonight for our breakout room, and who's the facilitator, and are you going to make sure you present everything? Like none of that's happening. We're just trying to figure out how to be better graders that would represent learning. And I probably had to unlearn the negative, like, oh no, I haven't being put in a group and I have to do group work. Because I didn't have a positive view of group work going into college.
And that's why it's important that Feldman includes that in his steps for the model that he gave us, is to have a chance to be able to talk to students about the norms of what they would like to see in the groups, because so many times they come with different experiences and can have a lot of those negative of like, every time I am in a group, no one does the work. I'm stuck with everything. I carry the weight of it. Or like a kid who is, a lower level saying, oh, I don't feel comfortable. I'm going to be with kids who are way smarter than me and I'm going to be embarrassed, and all those negative contexts. And like how great we can use these breakout room sessions as an example that sometimes just getting your heads together and thinking and sharing ideas and collaborating with each other is about growth and learning, and doesn't always have to be about the grade. Anyone else? We have time for one more. Pam Rawson, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I've been thinking about that passage on page 100 where using, the sort of the best level or current level of performance over time for one student, because it took them longer to get there, somehow devalues another student who got there quicker. And I don't believe that, but I know I work with people who believe that. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, how do you respond, to colleagues, or if you're a supervisor or a coach, how can we influence that, just because Maria already had that level of proficiency, but Ellis worked really hard to get there. They actually have demonstrated the same level of proficiency, so therefore they should have the same grade.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
how do we combat that?
I can take kind of that on, because I've taught all different levels. I've taught gifted and talented, special ed, ELL, regular kids, and it does happen. Like you have like kids or parents that are like, it's not fair. And I think one way to solve that is by using your formative assessments, by using pre-assessments, so that when you get the pre-assessment in, I used to do this in math. I'd do a pre-assessment and then figure out where the kids were struggling, and they would all get different things, or I'd group them based on their pre-assessment. And then we just move forward. So once you have kind of that classroom culture, those types of things kind of stop. But yeah, it does. And this is kind of, I think we've talked about when we stayed on last time, Jonathan kind of talked about this, like we're not pitting kids against other kids. We're taking the standard and asking a student to be evaluated against that standard and not against other children in the class. Because it really is an equity issue, especially if you start with like the home life, if the child was I mean, you see it in kindergarten, like right away, who comes in, knowing how to read, knowing their letters, everything like that has a huge advantage over the kids that have not been taught that. So that's my take on it.
Thank you, Pam. And Michelle. All right, so we are done with our session for this evening, and we want to take just a couple minutes, I think, to let you know that at the next 2 sessions, you will have a couple other amazing teachers who will be sharing with you from chapters 9 and 10. The second pillar, which is bias resistant, they are Stephanie and Melanie. I'm